Aloha, welcome. Morning, evening, afternoon. Hello, everybody. I like to see everybody. Oh, well, I think are we ready, Jesse? Enough people? Okay, I come. Um, I think a lot of in our spiritual life, whether we kind of understand it or not, the kind of spiritual journey or mythological journey usually includes leaving home. It usually includes like leaving our daily life, our work, our family, in some sort. It could be for a couple hours, days, weeks, months. And part of the description of that is a very determined renunciation. And it's a voluntary renunciation that sometimes can even look like a deprivation or feel like it at times. A lot of the Western retreat centers are very comfortable compared to the kind of ancient paths of renunciation. But even for us, a lot of us, leaving family, friends, home, work, um, all our support systems, is a kind of um, intense deprivation, and it takes some time to uh, get used to that shift. I think it's very interesting that that aspect of the journey when we stay at home creates its own challenges, right? It's so that sense of instead of eating what we're offered, we we get to like not only not have like mealtime, but we can like get food whenever we want, right? Like it, and it's like, so when do you have food? And just that, or when do you sleep there, or when do you walk and sit? It's like that whole support system of a group schedule and the protection of that is gone. So making that spiritual journey, that mythological journey, and creating that sacred space at home, I think just to give yourself credit, whether there are people at your home or not, that also presents different aspects, right? If you're alone, there can be a fear of being so alone. If you have people there, it can be hard to be quiet, right? All the different aspects. And I'm just kind of trying to touch base on that. There is a familiarity of being, there's a familiarity and a relaxation that can come from being at home. But also, then there's the creating a different kind of life within the familiarity, which isn't familiar at all. You know, quite, I think. This pandemic has offered us the opportunity to go on this spiritual quest at home. And it's like, I think I just wanted to name it. It's usually done away from home, right? And so even that pull to um, check just one email, just like that habit at home or work or whatever, however it isn't a habit or is a habit, that it takes a lot more um, renunciation. So I wanted to talk about that, just the reminder that in this practice, renunciation is considered a form of kindness. It's considered a form of metta. And I think it can be confusing that, like, when we go to do formal practice of sitting and walking at home, um, do we always see that as kindness for ourselves, or is it feeling more like a deprivation? Yeah. And to just explore that, like the pull to a certain kind of familiar comfort and rest, um, which can be supportive, but at times the choice to not do that can be also a form of kindness. And I think these are um, I think I find that most people, including myself, learn how to practice in a more relaxed, restful way, which is the goodness of it. And then there are times when it can feel like so hard to keep up even a chunk of formal practice. And um, just encouraging you to at least take chunks of time where you're doing formal practice. So that, as Steve had suggested, to create a schedule for yourself so that it's like not every sitting and walking you're deciding, oh, maybe I wonder if I should sit or walk, like every time. That's not gonna work, because we're so fickle. The mind is like so fickle in terms of like, well, is it kindness or not, or what's the motivation, right? It's like to try to figure out your motivation every sitting and walking. Forget it. It's just not gonna. It's gonna get too confusing. If you start dropping into the non-conceptual world, it gets even more confusing. So just have something, the reminder to have something to fall back on. And the idea is that, when we sit down to do a formal meditation, again, easier in a meditation hall where there's a support, but the idea is that you sit down and you don't get up until the end of the sitting. Unless there's an emergency, right? And the idea is that you decide to make that effort to sit down, and then the idea is to see what happens. The motivation isn't to get something or to get rid of something. It's not an endurance test. It's simply to stick it out, to see what happens. And that's strengthening, right? You go out to walk, you make a decision to go back and forth unless there's an emergency, right? Because it's like you just see so much, you understand so much. You see that you might believe you can control reality, but you see in that process that you can't. No matter how much you sleep, you're probably going to have some tiredness, right? It's like no matter how much investigation you might apply, you're going to hit boredom. That's the design of this. That's the idea of it, that you can't avoid boredom. You can't avoid sleepiness. You can't avoid fear, just as you can't avoid times of concentration and peace and joy. Yeah, the idea is that you're opening to more and more of just what's happening. And it cuts through that belief that we can control. And I'll go into this in a while, but just to remember that it's the same with a meal. You sit down and you just finish the meal. You see what happens, like that idea of sitting down and just then making space to see what happens. The idea of that is that you make a full commitment without an attachment to the result of the effort. And this is important for daily life as well as on retreat, in that we often get attached to the result of our effort. And when that doesn't pan out, we get disappointed, or I'm going to go into this more later, but just to know that that's what seeing what happens is just knowing that sitting there through that sitting is a good thing to do. That it's the commitment to sit that's the good thing to do. It doesn't matter what the experience is. And we can say till we're blue in the face, Vipassana is absolutely not about the experience that's happening at all. It's about how we're relating to it. Over and over, we learn this, that it hasn't, this has nothing to do with creating a state, a certain state that's idealized. It's about being with what is, not what we want. And that's hard. That's what this is about. Being with what is, seeing what happens. So I hope you're taking that in, that the effort isn't trying to create a certain state. The effort is in being with what is. And often I think it's helpful to kind of think there's like really only two possibilities of what can happen, either acceptance or resistance. That can be kind of comforting, right? It's like, just try a day where you're just checking it out. Like, oh, there's acceptance, there's non-acceptance, and both are okay. And from what I'm saying, both are equally valid, right? Because it's what is that is it's mattering, not what's happening. But what's tricky here is that we'll start to think that acceptance is better than resistance, rather than shifting to accepting resistance. There's always a place to yield in this practice. It's like, oh, not accepting resistance. It's like, it just you can keep opening up aversion to aversion or aversion, attachment to attachment to attachment, whatever it is. At some point, the mindfulness can kick in and go, oh, it's okay. I really, really hate this. It's okay to hate it. Or I really, really want this. It's okay to want this. That's good practice. To finally surrender to what's happening versus what you think should be happening. Because then you can work with it. Then you can go, oh, I was hoping aversion would happen again. What are we thinking? Are we thinking we're fully enlightened? Are we acting like that day to day in the world? I don't think so. And so this is a matter of like honesty, and more just honesty of like how things are. The more honest you are, the more you're going to get free. And resistance is so slippery. We're so good at resisting. We're so good at pretending that we're okay with something to ourselves. And we're so good at faking equanimity, of faking acceptance, of, it's like you might be halfway through a walking and it's like you're bored, and finally you're doing everything you can, and finally it's like, oh, maybe I could try accepting boredom, rather than choose to go lay down yet, right? Like, it's like, there's the key right there. It's like, maybe there's a time period in the day where you do choose that, but there's time periods where you decide, I'm going to go through this. Why? Because it's strengthening. There's nothing like boredom to cut through identification. People will think, oh, if I could just get rid of this boredom, I'll be liberated. But it's the opposite. It's like getting that boredom isn't you or me or mine. That's awakening. You don't have to get rid of it. You just have to see that it isn't yours and keep walking. No problem. And this is fundamental with everything that appears. We think it's an obstacle. We think we have to get rid of it to be free because we don't question whose is it? Is it mine? If it was mine, this is where you follow that train of thought. If it was mine, I could control it. If thoughts were mine, I sure would be doing a much better job at what was going through my head. You know, I mean, a lot of it is just this amazing chatter, you know, it's amazing. And finally, I'll just go, oh, yeah, why don't you try listening to it? And it's like, oh, I'm just trying to get my attention. We are so trained not to listen to ourselves in the way I'm speaking of. If you pay attention, it's usually, this isn't good enough. That sitting was okay, but it wasn't quite good enough. Maybe if we walk this way, maybe if I walk this way, my sitting will be better next time. Maybe if I eat just a little more, a little less, my sitting will be better next time, right? We come up with all these ways, it's almost like superstitions, but ways in which we can control what's going to happen next a little, just a little better with changing the behavior. So there is that kind of surrender on a daily schedule on self-retreat where that some of it needs to have that a structure, because otherwise we'll be at the whim of acceptance and resistance, right? If you're accepting, you'll stay. If you're resisting, you'll leave. And that this is a matter of, this is a practice of purifying motivation. It's a practice of seeing clearly what the motivation is, and learning not to run from the mixed motivation, but to wait and wait and wait until you come to a deeper place of motivation. Patience. Oh, it takes so much patience, which is again a form of kindness. Renunciation and patience are considered forms of metta. So that another way to approach this, of course, is when we're not liking what's happening, and the other side of the coin here, it's just the other side of the coin, not liking what's happening or wanting something else to be happening, right? They're just two sides of a coin. When we believe we can control experience, this is when we have a doubt. And this is so critical, especially again on self-retreat, because it'll feel more like you can control at home than at a retreat center, you know? And so just be careful of like, when that doubt comes up, what this is, if we don't see it clearly, we can go into these merciless self-hatred attacks. It might not be self-hatred, it could be blaming all kinds of other things. The hatred goes out or it goes in, but certainly it's this, you trace it back, like I said, the recipe, you can always trace it back to something unpleasant that we didn't think should be there. We thought we could control it, we believe we could control it. And often, you know, if you're hitting really massive self-hatred, of course we need to stop. And sometimes we need to actually just shift the practice to loving kindness or compassion. You can do walking meditation and just shift to loving kindness, compassion, or get a cup of tea, and you change the channel if you need to. If it's really bad, you have to find a way to get the connection back to yourself. It's like finding your heart again. I'm touching my heart center, but literally touching your heart center, getting a connection. It can be with a cloud, it can be with a stuffed animal, it can be with a tree. but just finding that connection again. I find there's so many different ways to talk about this. But it's like a karmic knot, a place that the karmic knot is something we either come into the planet with when we're born or the first few years, but there's some way in which there's a learned resistance to something painful, something very painful. We didn't get help learning how to witness it, have metaphor it, but it's the thing we slam the door on. It's the greatest resistance we have with it. A real, true, bona fide karmic knot feels life and death. If you feel it, you feel like you're going to die. And everybody hides theirs from other people. Everyone has one. We all hide them because we have so much shame of them. And it's really, again, when you trace it back and trace it back, it's like it comes back to aversion to aversion to aversion. It's aversion to pain. Often it comes down through generations, but it's like I have enough of them that I was just thinking what can talk about. But most people, it's usually fear of death. I mean, if you want to take out all the kind of early childhood, whatever, mortality is a big one. But if you fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, shame itself can be a karmic knot. And I'm not, the talk isn't about karmic knots, but it's about how we relate to them and how we pace them. And the way you can tell if there's a karmic knot is somebody you'll hear often you're in your own mind, but even with yourself, you can hear, oh, this is still happening. Oh, this came up again. And you'll start to hear the mind start to go, oh, I did 40 years of therapy, 20, I've done 20,000 retreats, whatever it is. I've worked on this and worked on this. And why is it still coming up? And you're going to do it with other people. You'll see somebody do the same thing again, and you'll be like, why are they still doing this? Right? It's like, we are so judgmental of people's karmic knots and ourselves. It's like merciless cruelty. If you think you're always compassionate, check out how you relate to people's karmic knots. You think you should get rid of them. We all think we should get rid of them instead of have a relationship with them. And I want to say that as much as a lot of abuse happened for me as a kid, but the karmic knots have taught me more about anatta than anything. It has taught me about a kind of pace that my wanting the pace to be different than what it is, it's like taught me to just eat it, eat it, eat it. Like just there's no way I have control of this pace. Wow, how wonderful, right? To learn that, to like let my system lead. Like when something comes up like terror and the self-hatred and the mercilessness and I want to dive in and just dive in, why? To get rid of it. If I just like knock myself out with this, maybe I can never have it come up again. That used to be my motivation. And I would really splat. I would jump into it and drown and jump into it and drown and drown. I have such strong willpower. Man, what a fight. Defeated. Jump, defeat, jump, defeat, jump, defeat, jump, defeat. I would never stop. It's like I just until it was really awful, just terrible until I finally started going, maybe there's a different way to work with this. and learning how to take small doses, small homeopathic doses. On retreat, it would be difficult to learn how to regulate it, but it's all just learning how to regulate, so that if terror comes up, if a merciless self-hatred attack comes up, do you disconnect from that experience? It's a learned disconnect, and use the willpower to override it, or do you just stop and say, maybe what might be best now? That's all it takes. And it usually takes, I remember the first time I actually was able to say, this might sound really maybe unbelievable, but I remember the first time on a retreat doing walking meditation where I stopped and I was like, oh, I'm afraid. Like, it's okay to be afraid. And I can say it, and this might sound easy, but for me to have a part of my attention that could witness the fear, connect with kindness instead of judgment, and just say, oh, it's okay to be afraid. What happened then for me? It was the first time I was safe with myself. The first time I was safe with myself. We want to get rid of these things. You want to get rid of terror. How about, or maybe that's not the issue. Maybe it's shame, but you want to get rid of it. But actually that means your system isn't safe there. It means your system's going to go, oh no, here it comes. Here comes the judgment. So does that system feel safe to show it to you? No, it's going to go back further into hiding and further into hiding. And we're less free. We might think we're more free than ever. Wow, it hasn't come up for 2 weeks. Wow, am I free? And then it comes up again and we have no relationship with it again. And we're not free at all. And we know it. Deep down, we know it. We know we haven't. We know we haven't gotten a relationship with it, so we have to manipulate our life and control our life so it won't happen. But it's bound to show up somewhere. So I'm not saying that you just jump in and try to conquer these karmic knots. It's much more that when they appear, sometimes you say to yourself, well, I'm not up for this at all. Time to go for a long walk. And really, that's like, if there's not enough mindfulness or metta or spaciousness for it or interest in pain, this is the time when you really listen to Steve and Jesse and I. Move away from it. And that's strengthening. Guess what your system's going to say? It's like, wow, that feels safe too. You've known what you're up against. You've decided not to get involved with it, but you don't disconnect from yourself. You reassure yourself. Next time, maybe you'll be up for it. You love yourself. You go for a walk. Not avoidance, but skillful retreat. And then another time we might connect a little bit, and then it feels like, okay, enough, too much voltage. Too much voltage. That was so hard for me to learn. I had to learn to underestimate myself and underestimate myself. I always would overestimate myself and think that that was strong. So the warrior motif, right? The warrior, the heroic journey, often leaves out the rest and the loving kindness and the pace, and they're completely interrelated. And I do really feel like self-retreat helps us balance that a lot. It helps us face that we need both. It can be humbling, but it's really important. We'll see the benefit of rest, but we'll see that it can be so attractive that we might do it more than maybe necessary, but don't worry about making mistakes. It's how you learn. Where did I go? Okay. And just remembering kind of underneath all this, the Vedana, the second foundation of mindfulness, it's just like, ultimately, it's like, it's just, when attachment comes up, it's simply attachment or striving. It's just striving. It's just wanting, or aversion. It's just aversion. It's just fear. It's like, oh, when we have enough equanimity, acceptance, these things are totally okay. This is possible for us, even if you get a glimpse of it. Sometimes it's like you'll feel the mindfulness, concentration, equanimity starting to build, and suddenly a thought that you would find repulsive will just be like, oh, it's just thinking. It's okay. You don't have to get rid of it. It just comes and goes by itself. Just thinking. So, in this process of believing we can control reality and experience, and then the disappointment that we can't, this is important. There's the doubt, but then there's just the plain old healthy disenchantment with experience. So, be careful again of like rushing through, like things not feeling good enough, and then making a new strategy or doubt, versus like just the Buddha taught that there's a stream of dissatisfaction running through the human mind, a stream of dissatisfaction. And it's when do we really feel like a moment is good enough in a sitting or a walking? Like, how much of the time are we saying, oh yeah, is there contentment? It's because we're not facing that it's not good enough. And it can get funny. It's like, how much of the time is there contentment? It's often because we're missing the hidden object is this part of the mind that's going, it actually could have been better. And I can joke about, the way we talk to ourselves. It's like if we heard it, it would be like that part comes in and says, oh, honey, that was okay, but that could have been so much better, right? And then we get hooked and we think, well, how can I make this better next time? And we do all these things, and we can't possibly make the sitting the way we think it was 3 years ago, that one time. Again, it's that little young part of it. It's that wishful thinking that we have to have kindness and humor with. Like, when that part of me comes up, I don't crush it. I don't step on it. I go, oh, I know. I agree with it. It's like, yeah, that could have been much better. You're right, but it isn't. How does our system trust us? It's bullshit. Sorry, but it's crazy to say to that part of ourselves, yeah, it's like, yeah, I'm totally okay with it the way it is. That's not true. It's not true. And then we can't work with it. We're pretending again, which is like, it's so destructive and poisonous, that part of us that learned to pretend it's okay when it isn't. And just going, oh yeah, it's like not good enough. It's okay. And what we do to other people, ooh, you think you're judgmental of yourself with you're not good enough. Poison. And if you look carefully, it's all around our humanity, accepting we're human. So being with things as they are, the interest and the boredom, right? The peace and the reactivity. It go, all the opposites, the sleepiness, the clarity, the on and on, that all of that. When we're peaceful, it doesn't mean that we don't care. We're born in a human body. everyone, that we know in terms of humans, we're born in human bodies. And wishful thinking is kind of a perfectionism that's so out of touch with how being human is that it's inhuman. So we need to see that embodiment requires, this real deep caring for the dissatisfaction, and knowing that that it's healthy to face it, so it leads to the healthy disenchantment that the Buddha taught was freedom. That experience, pain, pleasure, neutral, that is rolling along out of our control, that we're getting disenchanted with that. We're getting disenchanted with the aversion to the pain, the attachment to the pleasure. That's all. We don't keep biting the hook that this time this pleasure is going to solve the problem, right? Or getting rid of this is going to solve the problem. There's a great poet, Saigyo, from 1118 to 1190. He lived at a similar period as we do. He lived at the end of the Heian period, a great time of just less war, more peace in Japan. And he lived at the time where the military forces started to become the tactic of the times. And there were a lot of floods and earthquakes and fires. And I feel that he really attempted to face it, not try to go back to how it was, which is a pull, I think, nowadays, that if we could just go back rather than where we are. So he said, making my way through the whirling rapids of Miyataki River, I have the sense of being washed clean to the base of my heart. And if you think of retreat as the whirling rapids, I hope that you're getting the sense that you're getting washed clean to the base of your heart these days. But that process doesn't always feel good. I've said it before, but just saying again, it's like when the practice is sort of going the way you think. Good practice means that it's going the way you think it should, that there's mindfulness, energy, concentration, equanimity, or some ease of practice. But that's not the whole picture. The whole picture is that is like immersing yourself in warm, soapy water. And the warm, soapy water will bring us to see more controlling. We'll see aversion more clearly. We'll see attachment more clearly. We're supposed to. But we will get to a point, like today, I could hear it in the questions. It's like we'll think, oh, I should be having less aversion, right? I should be seeing less attachment. But actually, if you're doing the practice well at times, you'll be seeing more. You'll be having the times where it comes together and we call it good practice. But be careful of calling when the dirt comes out bad practice. It's good practice. It's just not what we like. When I was pretty young, I was born in 1951, and there was not a lot of Dharma out there to be accessing. It's an understatement. And in terms of anything written, but just I was very lucky to find this little book of ancient Chinese poetry. And there was a line in it: the blue of the sky touches my shoes. And that line had such impact for me. It was like 100% like shift. It's like, I couldn't tell you why it affected me like that, but I knew there was something so important and true about it. Like it's like I still have it. Like I'll look at the sky a lot of the times, and I'll have that memory of that line. The blue of the sky touches my shoes. Wow! Try it walking. I couldn't explain it conceptually, but I felt it experientially. And that third truth of existence, nothing exists by itself, anatta. I knew at that time that there was an understanding there that I couldn't explain, but I wanted to learn to understand more and access more. And there was a talk during my first 3-month retreat that Sayadaw U Pandita gave in 1984 that really affected me. And he described, maybe it affected me in a similar way as the blue of the sky touches my shoes. He said that it takes 3 things for a moment of consciousness in all of us, not just humans, but just like this would mean a gecko or a cat, or, but 3 things. So this is in itself cuts through the idea of a separate oneness somewhere, right? It's like, okay, so there's 3 things. So with a moment of seeing, there has to be a sight. There has to be that object of sight, what is seen. There has to be an eye door, and there has to be a mind, like a mind door. This is a door. A chitta is a door, heart, mind. So 3 things for seeing consciousness to appear. And he called it striker, receptor, ignition, just like a matchbox. The striker for this ignition, consciousness to happen in one moment. Striker is the object, right? What is seen. The place where you strike the match is the ear door. And seeing consciousness, knowing, seeing, is the third, consciousness, knowing. And it's very hard to wrap your head around this in some ways, but it's so brilliant in that it's so clear that there's no separate self there for a moment of consciousness to happen. And this is a cat. This is what happens with a cat. This is what happens with a dog. This is what happens with a bird. It's not just humans for consciousness to appear, knowing. Now, we did a guided meditation with knowing this morning, but when you were noticing knowing, did you think there was a knower? Was there can be identification with any of this as this is me, this is mine, this is I. And actually that knower, that knowing actually will disappear in one moment. Otherwise, we'd be dead. Aliveness means that things are moving and changing. If you watch your breath, it's very important to know that if your breath stopped for a long time, you'd be dead, right? I mean, it's like we don't always question these things. It's like, is that object of sight, light and shadow, color that's moving all the time? The eye door, like it's not static, it's not dead. The consciousness is not dead. It's so alive. It's taking birth and dying every moment. It's amazing. and something to be interested in at times, hopefully. So in Vipassana, we're cultivating momentary concentration, which is said to lead to wisdom. It's being with things as they are, remembering again, it's like how are things versus how we want them to be. And fixed concentration would be a practice such as if we had a dark room and we lit a candle and we said, just bring your attention to the candle, the light. And if a sound happens, ignore it and just come to the light. Or if a physical sensation happens, ignore it, come to the light. You get the idea. If fear happens, ignore it, come to the light. If a thought happens, ignore it. Ignore, 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 ignore. Repress, 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 repress. What is the goal of that practice? Bliss. Bliss, tranquility. It's something we yearn for. When I first started to practice, I had no idea about anything, fixed concentration, momentary concentration. But if somebody had said, that's a practice that leads to that, I would have said, I want that. That's like awesome, right? And then, but of course, no one did explain that. But I ended up with Vipassana, luckily, happily. But it was hard. I was in so much pain. It's like I wanted stillness. I wanted everything to stop. And I hope you don't have that as hardcore as I did, but I would have to really do some Vipassana. Then I'd have to go out in nature and just like hold on to a tree for like an hour just to like get my breath. And it's the metta, the love tells me I'm everything. You know, we need, as we've been saying, Steve and Jesse, it's like we need the loving kindness, we need the compassion, we need the mudita, we need the equanimity, the Brahma Viharas to be a support of the truth that love tells me I'm everything. But most of us don't like wisdom tells me I'm nothing. Sri Nisargadatta said, love tells me I'm everything, wisdom tells me I'm nothing. And between the two, my life flows. And just to encourage you to like, when you can, this is how I practice. When I can, I check to see, can I be with things as they are? That's all. If I can't, I just try to be mindful in a very light, ordinary way, maybe the bottom of my feet. I'm not trying to understand deeply. I'm just trying to be here. And that's restful. And so it doesn't have to be a big struggle. It's just checking, always check to see, am I capable of some investigation here? Am I capable of some joyful interest? And sometimes there's a resounding no. Right? I'm not interested in this at all. Forget it, Michele. There's like total 100% resistance. And I've learned to go, great, okay, time for a walk. Time for walking. And that's when I do tend to do the Tangpulu Sayadaw style of walking, where you do one length seeing, the next length hearing, the next length the physical sensations in your legs, the next length bottom of your feet. I've added in knowing. So I'll do seeing for 1 or 2 lengths, hearing 1 or 2 lengths, walking, stepping, knowing. And then then I might just settle into knowing, easeful, maybe, or maybe just a whole walking period hearing, but without a heavy kind of, not heavy, but with knowing that that's all I can do and that that's okay. It's very peaceful and restful. My type tends to want to be deep and not ordinary. And my system has forced me big time to learn how to practice ordinary, ordinary, ordinary until I accept it. Like it's like really amazing, powerful. Our systems tend to want balance. If we want all light and joy and want a lot of control and no pain, it's going to bring you balance. If it wants to like really be in touch with pain and hard, and it's going to force you at some point to have some lightness and joy. The middle path the Buddha taught is that balance. So that's why I say just show up and see what happens, because your system's going to balance you. It's not you that, it's not your thought about it that will balance you. It's your, like the wisdom that will balance you. It's the loving kindness that will balance you. I used to say, in spite of myself, in spite of myself, it would happen. And if for those of you who might have listened to the guided meditation, the anatta one I gave, the emphasis is on tuning into skin. You know, if you haven't heard it, but it's just like a gradual, just not going deep inside the body with the attention, but not staying way out, just kind of going along with the skin and just staying there and just really checking out like the boundary between inside, outside, and what are the actual physical sensations. Right. The word skin is very different than the physical sensations. And I tend to do that practice at times to just come to a deeper stillness without, again, too much effort or striving, but just like settling in. And just when you notice the very edge of the skin, there's actually very little there. It's just very light sensations, textures, vibrations. And it cuts through the idea of like, oh, this is me inside my body and everything else is outside. um, Technically, we borrow earth element to have a body. Technically, we borrow air to have a body. We borrow air element to have breath. We borrow water to have a body. We borrow temperature, earth, air, fire, water to have a body. And it's, again, that investigation at times is so critical to understanding who we are. Sri Nisargadatta said, the body is made out of food. Our body is made out of food. Pay attention when you pee. Pay attention when you poop. Who is it? Is it me? When you eat, is it you that goes in there? What is going on? This is so, again, fundamental to understanding who we are and who you are or who we are. Who is a gecko? Who is a bird? We're all eating each other. And it can lead to gratitude. And that I wanted to end with that just that sense of we tend to encourage you to do the loving kindness, the compassion, the empathetic joy and equanimity from that base of Vipassana. So if I do a gratitude walking or just stand and want to do a gratitude practice walking to get a cup of tea, it's like I'll ground with the sensations of hardness, softness, or touching before I shift to touching my cup and saying thank you, or drinking the water. And the gratitude practice is, of course, saying thank you. I borrowed this water to be alive, right? We're borrowing our bones, our earth element, we're borrowing it. We need to learn to take care of it because it isn't ours. So the deepest gratitude comes out of the deepest understanding of anatta. It's so pure. Borrowing emotion. It's like when fear comes up, we know it's information that our systems, our 3 million-year-old system is saying, oh, there's something to pay attention here. It's information. And say thank you before you're mindful of it. Any of it. Sound, sight, smell, taste, touch, thought, emotion. It's like any of it. We're borrowing. It's information that's always changing. But the mindfulness practice, that wisdom is learning how to discern it wisely, to understand the nature of how things are. And out of that comes the deepest care, the deepest wish for us to all be to, 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 to be free from suffering. It's a very, very noble thing to want to relieve the suffering of people on this planet and all the beings on this planet. One should never put that down. It's a noble wish. And the practice helps us understand that making the full commitment without the attachment to the result of the effort is what leads to less burnout, less bitterness, and more energy for the resolve to care. And it's a noble thing to we want to be fully enlightened, to end greed, hatred, and delusion. It's so noble. And we make full commitment without attachment to the result of the effort. So you focus on the practice, you focus on the good work in the world, not the result of the effort. Because these things, wanting to end starvation in the world takes time. If that's your goal, you know you're not going to probably end it tomorrow, but you know it's good to make the effort. And if you're getting out there and out of control and not able to function, then you know you need a break. You're getting attached to the result of the effort, not valuing that the effort in itself is the good thing. Just like ending greed, hatred, and delusion, you were on the retreat slogging away and it's like, oh, taking too long, it's hopeless, might as well give up. Why? Because we're striving, we're caught in the result of the effort, rather than that, boy, this is good to do, and if you need to take a nap, take a nap. We're always starting again. We're always beginning again. When I'm the most mindful, I don't know what mindfulness is. That's how much you're beginning again. Hmm. So, uh-oh. Oh, I had a piece of paper. Let's go. Hmm. Well, plan B. This is from Henry David Thoreau, August 17th, 1851. I am not so poor. I can smell the ripening apples. The very rills are deep. The autumnal flowers, forked blue curls, not only its bright blue flower above the sand, but its strong wormwood scent, which belongs to the season. Feed my spirit. Endear the earth to me. Make me value myself and rejoice. That's a little weed that you can hardly see that Thoreau is describing. You just step on it if you weren't careful. And here he is saying, they feed his spirit, endear the earth to him, and make him value himself and rejoice. It's why we slow down, take care. This appreciation can happen with one bite of food, with one breath, with one moment when you say, oh, I'm afraid. It's we all can do this. May we rejoice that we can do this. So it's there'll be the metta lullaby sit at 4:00 and time for something, maybe walking.